Hello, everyone. Welcome to the release of the Southeast Louisiana Residential Testing Study. I am Taya Fontenette, and I will pass it to my Executive Director, Jessica Dandridge-Smith.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon, as we've been on here since morning. But yes, it is officially 12:06. Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us for our Southeast Louisiana Residential Water Quality Study. I firstly just want to say a big shout out to our policy team. Rebecca Malpass, who was our policy director, is no longer with us, but we are really grateful for her leadership. And then also, I have to give a huge shout out to Taya Fontenette, who led this study, and Kennedy, who supported it. This has been a labor of absolute love and commitment to truth telling and honesty. So I want to firstly shout out the team members who are here leading this process because without them, this would not be possible. For those who are not familiar with the Water Collaborative Grid in New Orleans, we are a 501c3, and then we focus on building community-driven policy solutions to actualize water as a human right in a climate unstable world. Our work goes across many different areas from education and advocacy, which many of you may be familiar with some of our work around Brackish artists and our podcast, but our work is really centered around community engagement, truly focusing on trying to help people cut through the climate jargon and really feel that they are a part of this climate work, particularly the water work. And of course, our biggest issue and our biggest main area, which many of you are here today, is policy. And within policy, we focus on what we call water justice. And so water justice includes water quality, accessibility, affordability, and anti-privatization. Our work strand basically works from, of course, we're rooted in New Orleans, Louisiana, but we work across the state and at the federal level with some of our federal partners who may or may not be on this call. So at the end of the day, we are working across many different spectrums with many different people to make sure that our work around water is still always and rooted in rights-based water management and really thinking about how communities can see and be a part of climate action and climate movement. So as you learn the data from today, I hope not only that you learn something, but it activates you. And many of the people on this call will be part of that activation. They're doing amazing work on the ground, and we're excited to highlight them as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Taya, and I'm excited for you all to learn more. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. To start off, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Jennifer Schlezinger, Professor of Environmental Health at Boston University School of Public Health. Dr. Schlezinger is a public health researcher and toxicologist with more than 25 years of experience. Her work has examined how chemicals in our environment affect human health, with particular expertise in molecular toxicology. For the past 7 years, she has focused on PFAS, investigating how these forever chemicals can affect individual and community health. And she was also the author of our a report for this study. So thank you for being here today, Dr. Schlezinger, and the floor is now yours.
Well, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. In just a moment, I'm going to share my screen. But I first want to say it's my pleasure to join you today. And I'd like to start out by saying thank you to the Water Collaborative for asking me to, or inviting me to share the keynote address with you today. And one thing that I find really important about the work that the Water Collaborative is doing is empowering communities with data. I really want to stress that all of you have the ability to look at the data, to understand the data, and I'm here to give you some information to help you do that. So let me share my screen. Okay, all right. Okay, slideshow. Voila. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is give a brief introduction about PFAS, what we know about their adverse human health effects, and I'm going to share with you how the drinking water regulation was developed. So let's get started with the fact that PFAS are a large group of man-made chemicals. These chemicals do not exist in nature. So we believe that there are at least 14,000 different PFAS chemicals that have been or are currently being generated. So why do we have so many of these? Well, it's because their chemical characteristics of being resistant to high temperatures and being able to repel water and grease that have led to their being used in many types of consumer products, even as you can see on the screen, in dental floss and condoms. So they're used in this vast array of consumer products, but again, because of those chemical characteristics that they have, they're very important. They have been a very important component of firefighting foams that are particularly used to fight fuel fires. And they have been used as mist suppressants in the metal plating industry. So given that there are so many PFAS, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that we are exposed to mixtures of PFAS. And there are 6 PFAS that are commonly measured in the blood of the US population. Why only 6, you might ask? Well, they're the ones we're looking for in particular. So one of the significant problems with PFAS is that they don't break down. So a really important component of these chemicals is they have a carbon and a fluorine. And when those two molecules, those two atoms come together, they're really hard to break apart. So because they're not broken down very easily, they persist in the environment for a significant period of time, and perhaps, quite frankly, forever, which is part of the reason why they're referred to as forever chemicals. So something that makes PFAS unusual compared to the vast majority of chemicals that we toxicologists study is that PFAS dissolve in water. And so now PFAS that have entered the environment can readily move around through water that's moving through the environment. And so now PFAS also contaminate the drinking water of millions of Americans. So another issue or particular problem with PFAS is that they actually can enter the human body very readily, but they have a really hard time getting out. We just don't have the types of biological processes that let us get these chemicals out of the body efficiently. And so the problem with that is that these chemicals can build up in the body over time. So that PFAS are dangerous to human health was actually first recognized decades ago by the chemicals that were actually manufacturing these chemicals. But PFAS didn't truly become a part of the public consciousness until a community in West Virginia raised the alarm that DuPont's Washington Works plant was contaminating their community with a PFAS chemical called PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid. And since that time, the scientific community, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, and the Environmental Protection Agency have been building the database on adverse human health effects of PFAS. So the data strongly support that PFAS can cause increased levels in bad cholesterol, that they can cause liver toxicity, that they can decrease the ability of the immune system to respond to vaccines. So you don't readily make antibodies, or what I should say is if you have a high body burden of PFAS, that you're not going to strongly make antibodies after you've gotten a vaccine. PFAS are also associated with an increased risk of high blood pressure and high blood pressure related conditions like preeclampsia in pregnant women and pregnant people. And there is evidence that PFAS exposure during development results in smaller birth weights in babies. So PFOA, so recently the International Agency for the Research on Cancer convened to review the growing database of information on the potential human carcinogenicity of PFOA, perfluorooctanoic acid, and PFAS, perfluorooctane sulfonic acid. I happen to be part of the group of scientists that were brought together to review all of the data and to recommend classifications for these carcinogenicity classifications for these chemicals. And what was concluded was that PFOA is now classified as a group 1 carcinogen. And what this means is that it's considered to be carcinogenic to humans, specifically for renal cell carcinoma and testicular cancer. We were not able to come to the same conclusion about PFAS, not because it's not a human carcinogen, but because the database isn't sufficient yet to come to that conclusion. All right, so clearly there is a need to regulate PFAS. We know that they're found in drinking water, and we know that they are dangerous to human health. So the last thing I'd like to do is just explain how the final drinking water rule, the law, was developed. And it all starts with data and gathering data on the relationship between exposures to PFAS and the development of adverse health effects. These data come from both epidemiological, in other words, people-based, and studies, as well as toxicological studies, studies that we conduct under very controlled conditions in animal models like mice. So we use those data to establish something called a dose-response relationship. And we can use that analysis in order to establish how much of an exposure to a chemical will cause an adverse health effect. What's really important is that this relationship is not established based on a single study or a single data point, but the weight of evidence across as many studies as possible, from humans to animal models to understanding how toxicants cause adverse effects on cells in cell culture. All these data come together to establish what we know about the exposure and the potential for an adverse health effect. So once we do that, then there is a two-step process that leads to this data being used to generate a regulation. So in the risk assessment process, we use the data to generate something called a reference dose. This is the amount of chemical that someone could consume on a daily basis that is likely to be without an appreciable risk of harmful effects during a lifetime. In the case of PFAS, they're contaminants of drinking water. So the end result of the risk assessment process is something called a maximum, oh my goodness gracious, I am now hitting too many buttons. So if for PFAS, they're found in drinking water. So the result of the risk assessment process is to develop a value called a maximum contaminant level goal. This is the level of a contaminant in drinking water below which there is no known or expected risk to health. So we take that reference dose. So to generate the MCLG, as we call it, to generate that MCLG, we take the reference dose. We take into account how much water people typically drink and how much we expect drinking water to contribute to the exposure to a chemical as a whole. So the MCLG is a human health-based assessment, but it's not used in regulation. So what the next step in the process is the risk management process, where factors in addition to human health are taken into account to set the legal limits, to set the regulatory value. So the maximum contaminant level, the MCL, is the highest level of a contaminant that's allowed to be in drinking water. So MCLs, maximum contaminant levels, are set as close to the maximum contaminant level goals as possible. And really as is feasible based on the best available technology for treatment, taking into cost, taking into feasibility of both treating the water as well as documenting low levels or documenting concentrations in drinking water. But the derivation or the establishment of the maximum contaminant level can also be influenced by political and social factors. So what you see here are the MCLGs, the maximum contaminant level goals, and the final MCLs, maximum contaminant levels, which are the regulatory, the law-based values, are shown in this table. So I will end with just pointing out a couple of things. So notice that the final MCL, the maximum contaminant level goal for PFOA and PFAS are set at 0. And that's because the EPA considers PFOA and PFAS to be human carcinogens. And so there's no safe level of exposure. Notice that there are MCLGs and MCLs set for 3 other individual PFAS. And then there is also an MCLG and MCL set for a mixture of PFAS. The other thing that I'm going to point out is that notice for PFOA and PFAS that the MCL is 4 parts per trillion. It's not 0. And in part because 0's not achievable. And in part because the technology is not yet robust enough to reduce the level below 4 parts per trillion. The other PFAS are considered to be less toxic, and so their MCLGs and MCLs are actually higher than PFOA and PFAS. So I hope that this introduction was helpful to you as you see the data that are presented in the reports.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schlezinger, for both your time today and for your support on this study. It is very much appreciated. So let's transition to the results of the study. So to start off, everyone, hello, I am Taya Fontenette. I'm the Policy and Research Coordinator, and I was also the study lead or the project lead for this study this year. There you go. And so today I'll be sharing the results of our testing, starting with the context of the Mississippi River. So the Mississippi River is the largest watershed in North America, and it drains about 40% of the country, including parts of Canada as well. So just before the water reaches the Gulf of Mexico, it is diverted and treated to supply drinking water for Southeast Louisiana residents and businesses. So that means everything carried downstream, whether natural or industrial, has to be treated so it does not end up at our taps. Our first testing study took place in the summer of 2022 with a team of 6 trained fellows collecting river water and soil samples across 31 sites along 9 parishes in the state. So we analyzed for 25 PFAS chemicals as well as BTEX and 1,4-dioxane. In that study, we were able to establish that PFAS was detected 6 times across 5 different sites. Specifically PFBA and PFOS, which had a maximum of 5.37 parts per trillion. So detecting PFAS at multiple sites in the river made clear that what flows through the river at the great volume that it is, that can be detected, has the potential to reach our taps. Since then, there has been major policy and environmental changes that have reshaped our water landscape. So first, in 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law represented the largest ever investment in public water utilities at $50 billion. And that included $10 billion to mitigate and treat for PFAS and other emerging contaminants. In 2024, the Environmental Protection Agency released the first national standards for PFAS, covering 6 chemicals that was just reviewed. But recently, in 2025, the new administration has proposed rollbacks, delaying the enforcement of this rule by 2 years and attempting to remove 4 of the chemicals from the regulation. And then lastly, here in our region, we have been facing saltwater intrusion for the past 4 years that is coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, which has highlighted the need for regional collaboration to protect our water quality. So all of these changes pointed us to the question, beyond what we see in the river, what are residents actually being exposed to in their homes? For an overview of the study, our goal was to measure metals and PFAS in household tap water and to explore the connections between the Mississippi River, public water system treatment, and household results. Sampling took place over the course of 11 weeks, 9 weeks in the fall of 2024, and 2 weeks in the spring of 2025 to expand participation. We collected water samples from 7 parishes, including St. James, St. John the Baptist, St. Charles, Jefferson, Orleans, St. Bernard, and Plaquemines Parish. This work was carried out by a team of 5 trained fellows who not only collected samples, but also built trust and relationships with the residents through their direct engagement in their homes. Alongside the sampling, they gathered survey data on household demographics and knowledge about drinking water to help us identify any trends. We partnered with 6 community organizations that helped us get in touch with 160 residents throughout the region, ensuring that the study was rooted in local participation and local voices. All of our samples were dropped off the same day as they were collected and analyzed by PACE Analytical Laboratories using approved EPA methods. And as with our last study, every participating household received a gift card that they could use for their choice, but it could also help supplement the cost of a low-cost filter. For a brief contaminant review, we focused on 25 total contaminants this time, 18 PFAS and 7 metals. So as discussed before, PFAS are synthetic chemicals that have been widely used since the 1940s in nonstick cookware, waterproof clothing, firefighting foams, and many more products. They're called forever chemicals because they do not break down in the environment and they build up in our bodies over time. Research has linked PFAS, specifically PFOA and PFOS, to cancer, organ damage, and developmental risks. All 18 that we tested for are listed on the slide. And we also tested for 7 metals that can be found in drinking water, either from natural sources, plumbing, or industrial activity. So these included lead, copper, mercury, arsenic, antimony, manganese, and sodium. As Dr. Schlezinger mentioned, the difference between enforceable and non-enforceable regulations are also present here, the same as they are with the PFAS. So some of these limits are called maximum contaminant levels that are legally required to be met by utilities, and others are just health advisories or goals that are meant to guide protection of public health, but are not enforceable in any way. Before we get into the results, I'd like to describe how we looked into detections and to understand what the different terms mean. The first is a non-detect, and that means that nothing was found above the lab's detection limit. The second is a trace detection, and that means something was found, but at such a low level that it cannot be measured precisely. And then lastly, a quantifiable detection is a detection that was found and measured with confidence above the reporting limit.
Thank you for that. Yes, Sarah.
Oops. And so these measurements used are extremely small, and that is because contaminants can affect health at very low levels. And over time, these small amounts of exposures can add up, which is why ongoing monitoring and mitigation is important, especially as we're seeing that we're exposed to PFAS through so many different ways. By mitigating our exposure through water can be a very large sector of our exposure that we can eliminate or minimize as much as we can. And it's also important to remember that our results are a snapshot in time of when they were collected and the state that it was. Water quality can be affected by river flow, season, and temperature. And so throughout the report, we discuss detections and we make sure that we distinguish between trace and quantifiable while also acknowledging the relevance of total detections. So with all of that background in mind, we can get into the results. We tested 107 homes across 14 different public water systems, and the results revealed that contamination patterns vary widely, not just between parishes, but between public water systems within the same parish. So overall, PFAS were widespread, and that we found at least one trace detection in 98% of the homes that we tested. We also found that of all of our PFAS results, we found that 1 in 4 featured a detection. And lastly, we had only one home exceed the upcoming maximum contaminant level for PFOS. We also saw that elevated sodium was observed in every sample that was collected during the fall's low river flow season, and they were all above the EPA's advisory of 20 parts per million for sodium. And for our sampling distribution did vary, with Orleans Parish having the most homes tested at 39 sites and Plaquemines Parish having the fewest at 4 sites. And it is important to note that the spring testing was to get additional homes tested in Plaquemines, which we were able to get 2 additional ones. And so the remaining parishes had similar participation, and we were glad that they were all able to get engaged. So now to break down the metals. First of all, lead, which is not safe at any level, was detected in 68% of our samples and exceeded the EPA's action level only once at a value of 26.5 parts per billion. Copper was consistently found at low levels with a median of 32.7 parts per billion, with only 3 samples measuring over 1,000 parts per billion, but none exceeded the action level at 1,300. And just a quick note is that this study did not use stagnation protocols, so lead and copper results are not directly comparable to our 2024 lead study, where we asked residents not to run their water for 6 hours beforehand. Next, arsenic, which is also not safe at any level for long-term exposure, was present in about 70% of our samples, but were all under the 10 part per billion limit. Manganese appeared in 42% of our samples, with a concentration of 22 parts per billion being the maximum, all under the 50 part per billion limit. And our sodium ranged from 11.2 to 66.2 parts per million. And lastly, antimony was detected only at once at trace levels, and mercury was not detected at all. Connecting to our survey analysis, the contamination patterns with the metals showed a lot of sharp disparities. So our study's racial makeup did fairly reflect the state's population, and we found that while white households had more frequent detections, that Black and lower income households recorded the highest concentrations when it came to the metals. Now for a quick look at the river analysis to give a bit of context when we talk about the flow. We recorded this using weekly data from the USGS station at river mile 76.6 in Belle Chase, recorded at 12 p.m. on a weekly basis. And so as you can see, the spring flows were more than double the levels that we saw in the fall, with the saltwater intrusion threshold being estimated around 300,000 cubic feet per second. And so as you can see, of the 105 samples that we took in the fall, all of the samples collected had sodium over 25 parts per million, and that it only got below that once the river was at a higher flow rate. And so this highlights why seasonal testing needs to be considered for long-term monitoring and has the potential for us to focus on that if we choose to test any further. Next is the breakdown of the PFAS analysis. So as stated before, about 1 in 4 results showed contamination, and that was about 14.3% being at trace levels and 10.5% being at quantifiable levels. About 75% of the homes tested had at least one quantifiable detection as compared to the 98% that had a trace. Of the 18 compounds we tested for, 7 were detected, and 4 were quantifiable, being PFOA, PFOS, PFBS, and PFHXA. So the one household that exceeded the EPA's upcoming maximum contaminant level for PFOS, which is set at 4 parts per trillion, was Site 12 in Plaquemines Parish that had a result of 5.7 parts per trillion. And this result is even greater than the 5.37 part per trillion that we detected just 2 years before in the river. Not at this point in the river either. And then as we look into what was most commonly detected, because it is the oldest and the most commonly studied, we were able to find that PFOA and PFOS were the most commonly identified and quantifiable levels, appearing in 97.2 and 72.9% of our samples respectively. But unlike the metals, PFAS contamination appeared more uniform when it came to our demographics, with little variation between, the demographics or the water systems themselves. So here is a quick look at the top results by the parish. In the full report, we do also go into the specific public water systems as well. So the standouts so far have been that St. James had the highest lead and manganese detections. Both St. Charles and St. James had all arsenic results come back quantifiable, with St. Bernard and Jefferson having similar total detection rates. St. John the Baptist was the only parish with multiple sites that had no PFAS detections, with 2 homes. Jefferson Parish had the highest manganese detection rate, and Orleans Parish had the highest lead detection rate. And then lastly, Plaquemines Parish was the only one to have an antimony detection, which was at a trace value. That variation shows how different the challenges can be depending on where you live, how your water is treated, and how your water is delivered to you, either through public or private plumbing. So, our results showed that stronger safeguards are needed to protect Louisiana residents, not weaker ones, and that the safety of your drinking water should not depend on what parish you live in or which public water system serves your home. Regulations must be enforced, and greater attention needs to be directed towards preventing pollution at its source before we even have to get into treatment. We believe that the burden of clean water should not fall solely on residents who are too often left to pay out of pocket for bottled water, filters, or costly plumbing upgrades so that they can protect their home. And we also believe that utilities must be equipped with both the funding and the technical support to invest in modern treatment technologies that exceed our existing standards. And lastly, we believe that equity must remain central to the conversation. Communities of colors and low-income households continue to bear the heaviest burdens when it comes to water quality disparities. And that is why collaboration across agencies, utilities, and residents is essential to building solutions that are both proactive and long-lasting. So I would like to give a special thanks to all of our partners, our fellows, and participants who made this study possible. This was truly a collaborative effort, and we're grateful for everyone that has contributed to the project over the past year. And to bring this research to life, we invited a few residents and community leaders to share their stories. And so before we move into the panel and the Q&A, we'll watch our study documentary, which runs for about 14 minutes. And as you watch, be sure to note any questions or thoughts that you would like to share in the Q&A.
Have a glass of water. I would tell them to have a glass of water. Drink some of this water that's coming out the faucet. I don't want you to look at it and drink it. Come take a shower in my shower, take a bath in my tub, and see what we got going on.
I feel like we are dumping ground.
We deserve clean water and clean air. We deserve it. Is it safe or is it unsafe? We have a right to know.
The way I would describe the quality of my tap water, so on a level from 1 to 5, I would say 1. And I don't drink tap water, so that's the number one thing. I don't drink tap water. Been stopped since I was a child. Hi, my name is Brittany Scheck-Snyder. I am originally from Paulina, Louisiana, currently residing in Amer, Louisiana, St. Charles Parish. Ever since I was a child, we've known that the Mississippi River is literally the dirtiest river body of water in the United States of America, right? Because when you think about it, all of that water, all of that trash, all of the debris, everything from the ports is coming down into the Mississippi River.
My name is Jessica Dandridge-Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Water Collaborative of Greater New Orleans. Our mission is to help communities live and thrive with water. We've been doing water testing since 2022, and we really started focusing on understanding what's in our water system. We drink from the Mississippi River. We know we're drinking half of America's water, as well as their contaminants and their pollutants. How much of that water is being filtered out into from the utility to our faucet, and how much of it isn't. And the last thing is that PFAS is an emerging contaminant that is just now becoming a priority for the EPA. And so we really wanted to embark on this project to understand what are our risks in Louisiana, as well as what Louisiana can do about it, and then making sure residents know whether they're safe or not.
My name is Tish Taylor. I am the Program Director of Concerned Citizens of St. John the Baptist Parish. I grew up in Reserve along the river in Kyereh. As a young child, my dad was adamant about us buying bottled water. Just worried about the chemicals in it, worried about anything that might just, that could harm us and hinder our health.
My name is Sharon Levine. I live in St. James, Louisiana, and I'm the director and founder of Rise St. James. We had clean water. When I was a little girl, we weren't sick. We didn't have any problems with the water. Now since St. James invited all of these chemical plants to come in here, and for years, we didn't know our tap water was contaminated.
We are surrounded by petrochemical industries. It's just scary to know that we're surrounded by all of these industries that can just poison the air, the water, and the soil. And there's no regulation. There's no way for us to feel safe. I'm so grateful to have actually worked with the Water Collaborative. They cared enough to come into our community and actually check our water, test our water.
I wanted to learn what was in my water. And I found out what was in my water. I always speculated it was something that wasn't right. And the report showed everything.
Our family home is in Reserve, and my dad still lives there. I'm not surprised that there's PFAS in our supply. So PFAS has been around that long, and we're just learning about it.
Just spray, bake, and slip away. Yes, here in this handy spray can is new Slip Away, the revolutionary new non-stick coating for pots, pans, ovens, and grills. And Slip Away contains the magic of DuPont Teflon. Just spray the surface of your cooking utensils, bake in the oven for 30 minutes.
I am Anna Reade. I'm a senior scientist with the Natural Resources Defense Council, and I work on PFAS science and policy. So PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which is quite a mouthful. The important thing about PFAS is that it's a man-made group of chemicals, a very large group of chemicals that are used widely in our economy, everything from nonstick pans to stain-resistant carpets and rugs. Unfortunately, because they are man-made, they have a incredible durability. That durability, unfortunately, means that there's no way to break them down naturally in our environment or in our bodies. And so after decades of relatively unchecked use, we are now finding PFAS in virtually all of our bodies, in rainwater and soil and food and animals. They get into our bodies and they can affect multiple different organs and biological systems at the same time. So they don't just target one thing. They don't just cause cancer. They don't just suppress our immune system. They're kind of getting into our bodies and wreaking havoc. We're now at a point where over 99% of us that we have measured have PFAS in our blood. From a public health point of view, we really consider this a crisis. We're finding PFAS contamination everywhere we look. And yet we're still continuing to use them widely in our environment, in our economy.
There's nearly 15,000 different forms of PFAS. That is something that doesn't break down and can also cause cancer and other health effects. Unfortunately, you can't depend on your utility quite yet, and you can't depend on the government quite yet to regulate it. The utilities in Louisiana, or at least in Southeast Louisiana, don't have all of the equipment, the resources, the funding to deal with PFAS on top of the other contaminants that they're concerned about, and also dealing with climate change and climate risk from sea level rise, saltwater intrusion, you name it. So we really wanted to embark on this project to understand what are our risks in Louisiana, as well as what Louisiana can do about it, and then making sure residents know whether they're safe or not.
PFAS chemicals, the EPA set drinking water standards for them last year. That was the first time the EPA has taken their own initiative through the Safe Drinking Water Act to set drinking water standards in 28 years. And that's because there was a very vocal outcry from community members across the country concerned about their exposures to PFAS, and a very long and concerted effort amongst NGOs, community groups, and scientists to keep raising the alarm and saying that this is a huge public health risk. And that is the only reason why we saw action at the national level on drinking water standards for PFAS.
It's something that has to start from our government level. It's their responsibility to make sure that we have clean air, water, and soil.
But we can push them to make them do something about it.
This is a problem. Fix it. Don't kick the can down the road. Take care of business.
We solve it ourselves. If we don't try to save our lives, nobody else will. So it's up to the people. That's what I think.
Once we put on the gloves, we can't touch anything else. We've done 107 households so far across 7 parishes in Southeast Louisiana. So this is first for the PFAS sample. We just go straight in and collect this sample, making sure that nothing touches the inside of the container. Put that to the side. Next, we open the field blank sample, which is a PFAS-free water sent straight from the lab, just to see if PFAS is detected, whether or not it was due to the sampling procedures that was conducted at the site. That is poured into here at the same site, and making sure the top doesn't touch anything as well. And then next is just the heavy metals. So we're just doing 3 samples at each site. This one has less contamination risk. Close it. And then we take all of our materials and pack them back.
My name is Byron Marinovich. I'm 62 years old, but I've lived most of my life here in Plaquemines Parish in Buras.
Yes, my name is Henry McAnisby. I live in Plaquemines Parish, a little community called Lake Hermitage.
The quality of our tap water here is really bad. We've had a lot of issues the past few years with the saltwater wedge coming up the river. The chloride content is really, really high.
It's frustrating when you can't wash your dishes because you have no water. You have to, make your coffee in the morning, you're drinking water.
Right now, they lie to us and tell us, all the water's fine. No, it's not fine. We're paying top dollar for this water. We pay a lot for it, and nothing's being done. Biggest challenges we face is trying to get the parish government to pay attention. And also in the restaurant a lot, we serve bottled water and use bottled water. The problem about the extra expenses is I don't think a lot of the customers seem to understand and don't really get why we don't give away free water and why we have additional costs on some of the things we do here. So that's been really hard. It's been the cost effectiveness of actually running a business like this.
You look, you see trash in the water, you see plastics. So you think, okay, what is that doing to our ecosystem? What is that doing to the animals in there? What is that doing to the fish that we're catching and eating? And if those fish are catching and eating those plastics, then where are those plastics going? They're going inside of us. So we need to realize it's about the water, and it's really about us. How are we taking care of it?
We are where we're at in this situation now because the general approach to chemical management is that we assume chemicals are safe until proven otherwise. And at that point, that chemical is what we call entrenched. Too many companies are like, no, we need to use these chemicals. It's going to cause a huge problem economically. And so then there's a big fight to try and regulate those chemicals. And so I think what we need to do is change the way we think about chemical management. We need to see safety studies before a chemical comes onto the market. We need to be asking chemical manufacturers to do that work ahead of time before there's harm in our population. And so the more people that are involved, the more people that show up and voice their concern, the more we're able to pass policies and regulations that will protect public health and provide safe water.
Even if you're not on the front line, let's just say you're on the back of the line, you feel safe, you feel like your infrastructure is new. Eventually there's the comment that says we're all downriver. Everyone's fate in this state is dependent on someone else's fate. And we've learned that in many ways, but we don't say it out loud. And maybe you won't be the first person impacted, but eventually it's going to wind up at your door because of the state of water in this country. Like the old school thing, knowledge is power, really rings true here, is that if we don't know anything, we can't ask. And if we do know that something's wrong, we know what we're asking for. We can't create change in the city, especially in the state, if we don't know anything at all. And part of the knowledge is collecting that data, and that's what we're hoping to bring to residents as well as our elected officials. Knowledge is power, and so whether we find results of PFAS at all, they should know, and even if we don't, they should feel safer and more comfortable every time they turn their faucet on.
Thank you, Water Collaborative.
Thank you, Water Collaborative.
Thank you so much, Water Collaborative.
Thank you, Water Collaborative.
Thank y'all for what y'all do.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, I'll pass it to you, Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you so much. And before I get started, I'd like to briefly thank our wonderful documentary team of Michael and Zen. You saw their names out at the end of that documentary. Thank you guys for putting that wonderful documentary together to spread awareness on why these issues are so important and make community voices heard. So good afternoon. My name is Kennedy Moore. I am the state policy coordinator for the Water Collaborative, and in a full circle moment, a previous fellow for this specific study. So I want to quickly introduce our four panelists before kicking off a few questions for each to answer. To provide a quick overview to you all, we'll give each panelist a few minutes to answer two questions within their scope of expertise before opening up to one final question, and lastly, hosting a Q&A. All right, so starting off with Dr. Anna Reade. Anna Reade is a senior scientist and director of PFAS advocacy at the Natural Resources Defense Council. She works at the intersection of science and policy to reduce and eliminate harmful exposures to toxic chemicals for the safety of people and the environment. She received her PhD in developmental biology from the University of California, San Francisco. Next up, Emily Volkmar is the Vice President of Community at Aqualateral, a water tech-focused investment firm. She leads the organization's philanthropic and community engagement efforts, partnering with communities and nonprofits to identify water-related needs. Her work directly informs Aqualateral's investment strategies, ensuring that they are impact-driven and aligned with on-the-ground realities. Next, Scott Eustis. With an extensive background in wetlands and fisheries research from his master's from the University of New Orleans, Scott supports Healthy Gulf Science and Water Policy team by analyzing wetlands restoration projects, providing scientific arguments with comments against bad developments and wetlands destruction, and by representing Healthy Gulf in many public forums. Scott has a bachelor's of science in ecology from UGA's Odum School of Ecology and spends much time learning about our natural world with his daughters and the Louisiana master naturalist, GNO. Lastly, Kimbrelle Eugene Trey founder and executive director of Refine Community Empowerment, which is a grassroots nonprofit based in St. Rose, Louisiana. A lifelong educator and descendant of Palmer Elkins, who established the historic Elkinsville Freetown community, she champions clean air, water, and environmental justice in Cancer Alley. She draws on her experience as a teacher and community leader to equip families with tools to protect their health and advocate for safer, more equitable futures. Now that we've had a chance to get to know each one of these panelists, I'd like to kick off a discussion with what this study means to each one. So starting with you, Dr. Reade, this question is for you. I'd like you to answer quickly, why are PFAS such a challenging class of chemicals to regulate? And what does that mean for communities that are relying on public water systems?
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. Part of it is what I said before. There's not really a lot of studies that happen or are required before chemicals go on the market, and that's what happened with PFAS. And on top of that, industry actually hid the fact that they were finding toxicity effects in animals and finding widespread exposure long before the EPA or other scientists knew that this was a problem. So we've been playing catch up for a while. And because that happens, they're now used kind of widespread throughout our economy. And there's also the fact that it's such a large class. So what happens is once we start to realize that PFOA and PFAS were really toxic, industry already moved on to something that was 1 carbon less or 1 carbon more, had a little bit of a difference chemically, but could give them the same function that they wanted to use the chemical for. And it takes us a really long time to, again, show harm. And so this kind of traditional 1 chemical at a time approach that we usually use for chemical management is just not at all capable of handling PFAS as a problem. And what that means for water is that we are aware of chemicals that are in our water, PFAS that are in our water, like the 18 that were tested in this project. Unfortunately, we also know there's a lot of other types of chemicals, a lot of other types of PFAS that are being used that we don't know how to test for and could be something that we're exposed to on top of what we already do know about. And that increases the level of risk and harm if we continue to kind of just barrel down this road of really using whatever we want, the industry using whatever they want, and us not having a lot of control or information of what's going on. So one of the things that we worry about a lot is what we don't know is in our water, what we don't know people are using and what we're being exposed to. Thankfully, the treatments that are required to treat the PFAS that EPA has regulated are advanced treatments that will capture a lot of other types of PFAS, even if we're not regulating them. So that's a good thing. What we really do need to do is make sure that the EPA currently doesn't repeal those drinking water standards so that those protections remain in place. They're really important because not only do they, if you start treating for these chemicals, start treating for other types of PFAS that we're worried about, but they also actually capture disinfection byproducts, pesticides, pharmaceuticals, all kinds of other things that we're really concerned about that are also likely a problem in your water. And so right now, what we're doing at the Natural Resources Defense Council, we're involved in litigation to fight those repeals and the challenges to those rules, and hopefully we will be able to keep them in place so that those protections for an estimated 105 million Americans will stay in place.
Absolutely. Great answer, Dr. Reade, and I appreciate you taking the time to explain that to everyone. I think as complex contaminants like these continue to emerge, it's incredibly important for communities to have an understanding of how to protect themselves. So on the flip side, in terms of this protection mechanism, what promising solutions or policies do you see emerging over the next few years, either in the US or internationally?
Yeah, I think the 2 most important areas of movement that we're seeing now is an effort to manage PFAS as a class. So this is recommended by experts in the field that we, instead of doing 1 chemical at a time, we treat PFAS as a group. And that's because of how persistent they are. And if we can't get rid of them once we make them, we have to deal with the consequences of whatever harms that those chemicals pose for hundreds of thousands of years. So it's just not worth the risk. So that push to manage PFAS as a class is really important. It's promising. We're seeing the EU propose to do that and to phase out all non-essential uses of PFAS economy-wide. They're working on that proposal right now, which would be really wonderful if we could see that go into place. But also there are states that are moving forward and not waiting for the federal government. So you have Maine and Minnesota have also embarked on an economy-wide phase out of all non-essential uses of PFAS as a class. So Minnesota's already banned PFAS in multiple different product categories that they're not needed for. So think cleaning products and cosmetics and like apparel, cookware. And there's a lot of other states that are doing that as well. And so you're seeing market push from states instead of the federal government, which is really promising because the best thing we can do with PFAS is just not produce it when we don't need it, because we don't have great solutions for cleanup, right? So we can capture PFAS in our drinking water and clean it. And that's really, really important because that reduces a major exposure pathway for us. It protects human health. But once we collect it, there's no good solution after we've collected it, right? We have all this contamination in a filter or in RO water, and we have to put it somewhere, and we don't have a way to really safely destroy it. So it just goes back into our environment. And so I think the push to treat PFAS as a group and to stop using it when we don't need it is one of the most promising policy solutions that we're seeing. The other is a real focus on drinking water, because that is one area where we have the technology to clean up what people are getting. And we can't really clean up the food system, but we can clean up water, and we can make sure that people aren't drinking extra amounts of PFAS.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to what water quality policy improvements, where they take us over the next few years. And again, I appreciate your insight and providing more information on it. Next up, I'd like to pose this question towards you, Emily. As a part of a team of funders for 2 regional water quality studies with the Water Collaborative, again, this question is for you. How has partnering with organizations like the Water Collaborative helped identify community needs that can guide more impactful investments in water technology? And on the flip side, additional question, can you share an example of how community input shaped an investment decision later on?
Yeah, so we've been really lucky to work with you both on both of the projects around water quality in Cancer Alley. And for us, this kind of partnership is really important to understanding what technologies will be actually the most impactful based on needs identified by communities themselves. So if we were to take a really top-down approach, we wouldn't be able to know whether the products or solutions that are developed and that we invest in would genuinely be wanted or needed or adopted, which wouldn't allow us to really bring about meaningful change that we're hoping to achieve. So by working with organizations like you all at the Water Collaborative, we're able to have an understanding of kind of through your direct conversations with those most affected by water issues, we're able to understand what lived realities are really like and what the specific challenges communities face on the ground. And so this kind of collaboration really allows us to ensure that the investments we make are not only well-informed, but really contextually relevant. And so therefore more likely to really be effective and sustainable in the long term. And one of the first investments that we actually made was a result of working with the Water Collaborative on the first study you all did. At that time, the Biden administration was in office. There was a great deal of conversation at the federal level around establishing enforceable PFAS standards. But at the time of the first study and at the time of its release, the report's release, those standards hadn't yet been finalized. And so we already had a clear understanding that PFAS contamination was a serious issue affecting communities all across the country. But the findings from your study really brought into sharp focus for us the disproportionate burden that was faced by frontline communities, especially those located in regions like Cancer Alley, that are already experiencing environmental injustices and already really deeply entrenched in those. So the findings that you all had made it really clear that addressing PFAS contamination wasn't something that was just important in the future in order to kind of take advantage of regulatory compliance, but it was a really pressing public health and environmental justice issue. So that really catalyzed one of our first investments in a PFAS destruction technology because we recognized that there was a need for an immediate, tangible solution. So it wasn't just aligned with policy, but it was really, really trying to meet the urgent needs of communities that were already suffering the consequences of inaction that were identified by you all.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for your answers, Emily. It's always a pleasure to work with you and Aqualateral. And it's, again, equally as important for us to be able to associate these issues that are going on at the community level with the community voices themselves. So thank you again. I'd like to turn to you, Scott, to pivot on what the implications of water quality have on our environment. So if you could, please answer for me from your experience, how has science-based advocacy helped Louisiana communities hold decision makers accountable to environmental issues?
Well, it has affected incredible changes and it continues to affect amazing benefits, but it's never been easy. Sometimes the science is all we have here in Louisiana. We've traditionally had a great lack of scientific curiosity from our state agency, and even statements that, well, LDQ has stated, oh, we collected that data, but then we didn't use it. So we've always depended on scientific resources from out of state, like from before I was even born. But the amounts of improvements that we've seen when we can stick to it, and when I say stick to it, sometimes that research happens over a decade. The recovery of Lake Pontchartrain would not have been possible without aquatic scientists willing to study the effects of dredging in a way that was deleterious to their scientific career. But because of that, we now have today in 2025 a recovered Lake Pontchartrain that a lot of people enjoy. These animals in the photo behind me were some of the greatest affected by a chemical DDT, something very central to the profit margins of the chemical industry when it was first revealed that that chemical was very bad for our wildlife. But once regulation was in place, we've seen almost the total rebound of the brown pelican to the state. So what's clear about a place like Louisiana, and especially Plaquemines Parish, the benefits of scientific investigation in terms of improving our environment are, we can bring back paradise, but it often doesn't quite align to your typical publication cycle for a master's student. And you understand we have to pursue these scientific investigations in an environment where a lot of people have given up hope on certain things. When we were down in Plaquemines talking to people about PFAS, of course, residents want to talk about all the industrial fires that are happening at the coal terminal where EPA never comes and visits. They want to talk about I think we've had about a dozen oil spills in the parish in just the past 2 months. I've had people say, well, Scott, I'm not an environmentalist, but we've got to do something about all these oil spills that are happening all the time. So I think there can be a lot of miscommunications and people talking past each other, as well as a loss of hope when it comes to, well, why do we need to study this? We know what the solution is. But I think in terms of affecting those political policy changes, or even if it's just raw litigation, there's nothing like the clarity of a scientific investigation that enables us to pursue very precise interventions and bring back our paradise.
Absolutely. Similar to Dr. Reade's response earlier, it seems that advocacy at all levels is incredibly important to know how communities can better protect themselves, and seeing their environment as an extension of their community is incredibly helpful in terms of, again, advocating for better water quality. So thank you so much, Scott. I always appreciate your perspective here. Last up, Kimbrelle, I'd like to, again, I've mentioned the importance of community advocacy during this entire time. So you're the perfect panelist to discuss this in depth. So I'd like to know, what concerns have you heard most from residents in St. Rose about water quality, and what do you feel is missing within conversations with whether it's local officials, state agencies, or local utilities when it comes to protecting residents from this environmental pollution?
Well, good afternoon. What I've heard from local residents here in Kyereh is that many of the residents, of course, are concerned about what's in their water. And the reason I'm hearing that is that some people say it doesn't taste good, it doesn't taste right. So they don't trust the quality of the water. Then you have other residents who say, well, when I bathe with this water, my skin itches. I have skin irritation. There are people who are also concerned about, can I use this tap water when I take my medication? Or may I use this tap water when I am making my baby formula? So the concern is very real, and it also concerns some residents about, what if the grid goes down? What do we do? We have the Mississippi River here. Is it safe to drink the water from the Mississippi River? You know, how can we filter this water in case we don't get water through our tap? So the concern is very real. And they also want to know, how can we protect ourselves? So what filter is the best filter? You know, if we use a filter in our homes, and how can we afford to protect ourselves with these filters? In terms of what do I feel is missing in conversations with officials or utilities when it comes to protecting residents from environmental harm, we need accountability. We need these conversations to happen. We need to hear the type of results that the Water Collaborative have found. We need to be hearing that from our public officials and those people who are supposed to be protecting us. We also want to have a platform in which we can advocate and talk about these things. So town hall meetings, you know, that's my expectation. My expectation is for the public officials and those protection agencies to bring this information to residents in real time. You know, of course, this is great that we have this snapshot, but if we have something ongoing, you know, from our officials, so that we could be well informed as to the quality of our water, which affects the quality of our lives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kimbrelle. And to all of our folks residing in Orleans Parish, this is an important reminder that election season is here. And so hold your public officials accountable and make sure that they align with what you feel is necessary for your communities. So thank you again to all of our panelists for sharing their expertise. I'd like to quickly wrap up our discussion by posing one final question to you all. We'll make it kind of a speed round as we're running a little bit short on time. So I'll give you all 30 seconds each to give one last final insight or lesson that you want to leave with the audience in regards to their water quality or what it takes to community advocate. So I'll start backwards. We'll start with you, Kimbrelle. And then we'll pass it along to Scott, then Emily, and then Anna.
Okay, thank you. I think it's important for all of us to know that it's necessary, like Ms. Sharon said, to advocate for ourselves, to advocate for our families and for our own communities. to take the information that was received today and take it to our community. Let people know what the results were in terms of what the Water Collaborative have found to be issues with our drinking water. So also we have to take the initiative to protect ourselves with adequate water filters and advocate for help to do that, to protect ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kimbrelle. Scott, what would you like to leave for the audience?
Stick with this issue. This is an emerging chemical on top of a lot of the land and water issues we already have. And I know it can be tempting to just look the other way. But we know what the solutions are. Just like the dead zone of the wetlands crisis, we know what the solutions are. We know that the solutions are in the long term, and persistence is the key, both in scientific research and in political advocacy. You eat the elephant one bite at a time, and there are great benefits of sticking with it and staying the course. So thanks for joining us today to take a look at these initial results.
Thanks, Scott. Emily, you're up. What would you like to leave?
So I think I'm echoing a few other people, but to me, I really want to highlight the importance of data, and that's not only in shaping kind of investment decisions like ours, but also, as you shared, in terms of empowering communities to advocate for themselves. So a project like this really makes water issues visible and legible, which helps to really let communities transform their experiences into actionable information. So for communities that have really struggled for a long time to be heard, having this kind of concrete data around water quality, it's really allows for a powerful means for advocacy. And so that allows for the foundation of engaging with legal aid organizations, with government agencies, and even potentially attracting mission-aligned investors. So the kind of data that you all have produced, it doesn't just validate lived experiences, but it helps to really translate them into measurable terms that broader institutions can interact with and respond to. So yeah, so this project and report is really important in the way it can bridge that gap between community needs and systems of power, allowing communities to elevate their voices.
Thank you so much, Emily. Lastly, Anna, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, it's hard to follow all that up, but I would just say from a kind of a national, international perspective, the communities aren't alone. There's a lot of communities that are dealing with what to do about PFAS, finding them, that they're affected, and they have them in their water or in their food or their soil. The good thing is that because so many people are starting to become aware of the problem, and there's been so much research done to bring data and show that people are being exposed to these chemicals, there's been a lot more movement in this space than I think a lot of us who have been working in the chemical space have seen in a lot of other cases, and so that's inspiring. And I think it has to do with so many people working on the issue, and I've seen things that I didn't think were possible, like the national drinking water standards. We haven't seen those released and finalized in decades. And so that has to do with, as Scott said, a long push and persistence by everyone involved. And so I think there's some positives to grasp onto and not just be overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem. So I leave it with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you again to all of our panelists for taking the time to answer a few of these questions and provide some context to our viewers. And again, thank you for leaving one final piece of positivity for our viewers. I know that this data isn't necessarily the most exciting or uplifting thing, but it's important to note that we are all recognizing that knowledge is power, like Jessica mentioned at the beginning. And so I Thank you again. So I'd like to turn it all over to you now, to the audience. We have a few questions that have been popped into the chat, so we'll go along and answer those in the order that they had been submitted. But once we get past that, if we still have time, we'll have some time for you all to pop off of mute and answer some questions. So I'd like, again, to start off in the order that they were submitted. Emily asked at the beginning of today's presentation, what should readers understand about the size of the sample of 107 homes and how well it reflects across water quality across Southeast Louisiana, particularly in bigger parishes like Orleans or Jefferson?
I can start with that, and then if any of the speakers, if you would like to add on, feel free for any of these questions. But of course, with independent testing like this, the size of our studies are really about the means that we have and the resources that we have and a lot of time. So we definitely don't believe that 107 is representative of the region. We believe that it is some preliminary data for us to get a baseline understanding of what things look like in the region. And to ask some questions. You know, having a site or a parish that only had 4 sites tested, we cannot come up with any large generalizations. But we have, at this point in Orleans Parish, tested several hundred homes. So we have a better idea of what specifically is affecting us in this parish. But we definitely believe that this is a jumping off point to continue to learn and to encourage more people to test. As PFAS testing is a little more difficult than metals. It's more expensive. So there are a lot of barriers in between when it comes to giving all residents as extensive of a look into their water quality as we were able to do here. So definitely a starting point, a good reference that can be used, but not representative of an entire parish or water system at all.
Thank you, Taya. I'd like to move on to our next question that was popped into the chat. Kathleen asked, she was wondering how effective is water boiling process at eliminating contaminants, or is it better when possible in general just to use bottled water? And she says she's located in St. Charles Parish.
Yes, I can also start on that one. And say that just as we were preaching from the rooftops with the lead study, boiling water does not remove contaminants like metals and PFAS. It can actually increase the concentration if like more of the water is boiled off, which can cause more harm. We were having a conversation in the chat about the safety of bottled water, which it is not as well regulated as public drinking water that comes from systems. But of course, we know in emergency situations, there's always a time and place when you choose which is a better source to use. But yes, boiling definitely helps with pathogens and microbes, but it does not help with any of the contaminants that we tested.
Thank you for your answer, Taya. I think it's important to note that for the audience, especially residing in Southeast Louisiana, where boil water advisories are incredibly abundant. So just keep that in mind. And that brings us to our next question, which was semi-answered in the chat in terms of what standard water filters, such as Britta's or other types of filters, can help with consumption. Sharon asked this question, and it looks like Erica put in the chat the water filter that she uses. So could you just talk a little bit more about some of the other types of water filters that could filter out these specific types of chemicals?
Yeah, so the main brands I believe like that a lot of us know, like Brita or Pure, the brands in Aquasana, like Erica mentioned, they do have options for when it comes to filters that can reduce PFAS. With any type of filtration that you look into, it is important to see what standard that it follows. To make sure that it is removing the contaminants that you were seeking to remove. So as long as it's, well, for the NSF, National Science Foundation's like safety standard, it's for PFAS, it's 53 or 58. It's a very quick look. If you like go on a lot of websites when it comes to the searching, you can do filtering when it comes to the standards that it has. But it's just very clear to be sure that it specifically says remove or reduces lead, reduces PFAS. And you can also see that they will have testing reports that shows the efficacy of their filters, which is really helpful to see. So the brand does not matter. It is the safety standard that it has been approved with.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for popping that into the chat as well, Virginia. Personally, I use zero water filter. It gives you a little read of how many dissolved solids are within your water source. So I'd recommend that one as well. All right, so moving on to our next question. This came from Sarita. Could you please speak on the sampling strategy that was used for the households within this study?
Yes, so I should have asked, I wasn't sure if this was specifically about how we chose the homes or how we sampled the residences, but we'll say that this was in terms of how we chose the homes. It was on a first come, first served basis. We asked the community partners to help us get in contact with residents so they would sign up, and we were just letting people in. As you can assume, this was supposed to be an equal distribution study, and we didn't intend for it to have an overwhelming presence in the study. But around the time at the end, we had to select some homes so that we can meet the quota for the total amount of homes that we wanted to test. But it was first come, first served. And when it came to our sampling, you could see it a little bit in the documentary when I did a little recreation. But we had 3 samples. So we took a field blank and a PFAS to ensure that the PFAS detected was not something that was cross-contamination between the fellows collecting the water and the water that was coming out of the sink. And then we also tested for metals. So each home had 3 samples that were collected and sent to the lab.
Thank you, Taya. All right, so moving on to our next question. This one again was from Emily. She'd like to know if you can clarify the difference between the percentage of homes with PFAS and the percentage of homes the total test results of the detection. So the 98% versus the 24.8%. I think that's good to clarify for all the audience. So thank you for your question, Emily.
Yes, thank you. This was something that we really thought hard about on how do we make sure that it's clear, even though it seems like everything with this study needs a little bit of an explanation. But like we said, we had 107 homes. And so we went by and saw like what percent had at least one trace. When it came to our 24.8% of samples, our results specifically, that was talking about of all of the PFAS results itself, not including which homes it was in, not including any of the metals results. We're saying 107 homes, 18 contaminants. That was about 1,900 results that we got. And so the 24.8 was of the 1,900 total results. And as we saw, 11 PFAS weren't detected at all. So that was all in that other 3/4 of not even detected. So it was really specifically the PFAS results. And then if at least one trace value was found in a home, that was what counted for the 98% of homes. And then same with the quantifiable when we were detecting that it was in 3/4 of the homes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that clarification, Taya. I'll combine the last 2 questions just because we're running a little bit short on time. But in terms of regulation, Rachel and Robert both asked similar questions, and from Rachel in terms of pushing forth an effort to advance a Green Amendment constitution or protection to help PFAS and contaminant prevention in Louisiana. What strategies are available to address pollutants like PFAS and all these heavy metals?
Yes, so for change to happen at the state level, there has to be a champion who is dedicated to solving this issue and to working with communities to find a solution. We've tracked the last 2 legislative sessions. There are many bills when it comes to how utilities are run and water quality, but nothing too specific when it comes down to certain contaminants or anything. So it really is just about engaging with our leaders and telling them that this is something that is of concern for residents in the region, and that that's something that we would, love. I think that's really the pressure, is to show that there's really no choice but to like be supportive of water quality initiatives, which we all know is a little tough to get our representatives to represent us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Taya, for answering a few of these questions. And again, of course, thank you to our wonderful panelists for coming in and discussing some of these topics in depth with your expertise. So I'd like to lastly pass it back to our Executive Director, Jessica Dandridge-Smith, to just do a closeout. And again, a thank you to all of you guys who joined.
Much. Firstly, Kennedy and Taken for their hard work. Y'all, if you can give them a round of applause virtually, they did all of this work. The policy team did all of this on their own. I provided strategic guidance. They did the hard work. So they are doing phenomenal work and continue to do so. I also want to thank our community partners who are on this call as panelists and also some who are in the chat. Again, this would not be possible without their partnership and without their buy-in. I want to thank Aqualateral LLC, particularly Emily and her team for continually funding our work. Anybody who is a nonprofit or community-based organization, you know how hard it is to find funding for real in-depth data collection on water quality. It's not easy, and so grateful for their continued partnership for the last several years. Thank you to the documentary team. Thank you to our all of the partners who helped Case and then Pace Analytical, who helped do all the data collection as well as the research. Thank you to everyone, and thank you to all of our friends and partners who are supporters of ours. We are a community-built and community-led organization, so we would not be able to do what we do without you. Please make sure you, again, Taya has posted the full report, the one-page summary, and the documentary online. We'll also send that out along with a copy of the reporting after this is over. And lastly, I'll end on maybe a positive note. Kennedy mentioned, and other folks mentioned, I think Kimbrelle as well, is about how to be active. We are hosting a water and coastal mayoral forum here in Orleans Parish tonight from 6 to 8. And these are great questions that some of you could bring to our elected officials. They need to be held accountable and they need to know that we are prioritizing this. So again, without further ado, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and your day. And again, we're grateful for your partnership and all of the work that you all have done over the last couple of weeks and months, actually. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.